The dust cloud billowed across the horizon as Abigail Vallens fought against the coarse rope, binding her wrists to the back of her brother's wagon. Each jolt sent shards of pain through her body, the unforgiving terrain of the Arizona Territory scraping away at her dress and flesh as her own blood stained the parched earth beneath her. It was 1876, and out here, a woman's fate often rested in the hands of men who claimed to love her or claimed to own her. The sun beat down mercilessly as the wagon rattled along the trail toward the mining settlement of Copper Springs. Her brother, Edward Vallens, sat rigid at the reins, his hatred palpable even from where Abigail struggled. Their father's will had left her half the family's claim, and Edward wouldn't stand for it. He'd rather see his sister dead than share what he believed was rightfully his alone. "You'll sign it over when we reach town," Edward had snarled before tying her to the wagon, "or you won't live to see another sunrise." Abigail's throat burned from screaming, her voice now reduced to a ragged whisper. "Please, Edward," she managed, though she knew her pleas fell on deaf ears. The brother she had once adored had transformed into something unrecognizable after their father's death 6 months prior. She closed her eyes, feeling consciousness slipping away when the rhythmic pounding of hooves cut through her pain-addled mind. A horse approaching fast, too fast for these dangerous trails. Jackson Wyatt had been tracking a herd of wild mustangs when he spotted the dust cloud in the distance. Something about its movement caught his attention. Something wasn't right. He urged his stallion forward, closing the distance rapidly as a sinking feeling settled in his gut. Through the haze of dust, he saw a human form dragging behind a wagon, bouncing violently across the rocky terrain. Without hesitation, Jackson spurred his horse harder, racing alongside the wagon, his eyes widening at the sight of a woman's battered body. "Stop the wagon," he bellowed, drawing his revolver. The man at the reins merely glanced back, his face contorting with rage as he cracked his whip, urging his horses faster. Jackson holstered his gun and made a split-second decision. He pushed his horse forward, angling closer to the rope that bound the woman. In one fluid motion, he leaned down from his saddle, his arm extending toward her. Their eyes met briefly, hers a startling shade of green despite being bloodshot with pain and terror. "Take my hand," he shouted, straining to reach her. With what must have been her last reserves of strength, Abigail lifted her bound hands toward him. Their fingers touched, then clasped. With a powerful pull, Jackson lifted her from the ground, severing her connection to the wagon. He swung her up onto his horse in front of him, cradling her against his chest as he pulled back on the reins, slowing their pace to prevent further injury. The wagon continued forward, its driver seemingly unaware or uncaring that his prisoner had been freed. "I've got you," Jackson whispered, feeling her body go limp against him. "You're safe now." Her eyelids fluttered as she fought to remain conscious. "He'll come back, for me," she managed before darkness claimed her. Jackson looked down at the woman in his arms, her face streaked with dirt and blood, her dark auburn hair matted with dust, and made a silent vow. Whoever had done this to her would answer for it, and he would make sure she never fell into their clutches again. The nearest town was Silver Creek, a half-day's ride to the east. Jackson adjusted his hold on the unconscious woman and turned his horse toward safety, acutely aware of the fragile life he now protected. As they rode, Jackson took stock of her injuries. Her wrists were raw and bleeding where the rope had cut into them. Her dress was torn in places, revealing scrapes and bruises along her back and legs. A gash on her forehead had stopped bleeding but would need cleaning. Despite it all, there was something striking about her, a delicate strength in the curve of her jaw, the arch of her brows. "Hang on," he murmured, though he wasn't sure if she could hear him. "We'll be somewhere safe soon." Jackson had been a loner since the war ended 11 years ago. At 32, he'd made his peace with solitude, finding work as a horse trainer and occasional bounty hunter. He'd never expected to find himself playing rescuer to a woman in distress, yet here he was, oddly protective of the stranger in his arms. The sun was beginning its descent when they reached Silver Creek. The small town consisted of a main street flanked by wooden buildings, a general store, saloon, blacksmith, and at the far end, a modest doctor's office. Jackson headed straight for the latter, careful not to jostle his charge more than necessary. Dr. Thomas Miller was an older man with kind eyes and steady hands. He didn't ask questions when Jackson carried in the unconscious woman, simply directing him to place her on the examination table. "What happened to her?" Dr. Miller asked, already gathering supplies. "Found her being dragged behind a wagon. Man driving it didn't seem inclined to stop when I called out." Jackson kept his voice level, though rage simmered beneath his calm exterior. The doctor nodded grimly. "I've seen similar things, though usually with rustlers or horse thieves, not." He gestured toward Abigail. "She needs a safe place to recover when you're done," Jackson said. "The man who did this might come looking for her." Dr. Miller considered this as he began cleaning Abigail's wounds. "My wife and I have a spare room. She can stay with us until she's well enough to travel or decide what she wants to do next." Jackson nodded, relieved. "I'll pay for her care." The doctor paused, studying Jackson with newfound curiosity. "That's generous of you, Mr. Wyatt, Jackson Wyatt." "You're welcome to wait in the front room, Mr. Wyatt. This might take some time." Jackson hesitated, oddly reluctant to leave her side. "I'll check on my horse and be back shortly." Outside, Jackson secured his horse at the hitching post and headed toward the sheriff's office. He needed to report what he'd witnessed, though he doubted the local law would do much about it without knowing who the wagon driver was or where he'd gone. Sheriff Benson was a stout man with a bushy mustache that seemed to twitch with every word he spoke. He listened to Jackson's account with an expression that grew increasingly troubled. "You say you didn't recognize the man?" the sheriff asked. "No, never seen him before." "And the woman, you don't know her either?" Jackson shook his head. "She managed to say he'll come back for me before she passed out. That's all I know," the sheriff sighed. "Not much I can do without more information, Mr. Wyatt. I'll keep an eye out for anyone matching the description you gave, but—" He trailed off with a shrug. "I understand," Jackson said, though he didn't, not really. How could anyone shrug off such brutality? "I'll be at the doctor's office if you need me." When Jackson returned to Dr. Miller's, he found the doctor washing his hands while his wife, Martha, was straightening blankets around Abigail, who remained unconscious. "How is she?" Jackson asked. "She's strong," Dr. Miller replied. "Multiple lacerations, bruising, and dehydration. She has a mild concussion, but no broken bones that I could find. With rest and care, she should recover physically." The physically hung in the air between them. "Has she woken at all?" Jackson asked, briefly. She was disoriented, frightened. Martha managed to calm her enough to take some water before she drifted off again. Dr. Miller dried his hands on a towel. "I gave her something to help her sleep. She needs it." Jackson nodded, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "I should probably stay," Martha Miller interrupted. "At least until she wakes properly. You're the one who saved her. A familiar face might help when she's trying to make sense of where she is." Jackson hadn't considered that. The thought of leaving suddenly felt wrong. "I'll find a room at the boarding house." "Nonsense," Martha said firmly. "We have a cot in the back room. You can stay here tonight." Before Jackson could protest, Dr. Miller added, "It might be safer for everyone if you're close by, if the man who did this comes looking for her." That settled it. Jackson wouldn't leave her unprotected. "Thank you." Night fell over Silver Creek, and Jackson found himself sitting in a chair beside Abigail's bed, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest. In sleep, with her wounds cleaned and bandaged, he could better see the woman he'd rescued. She was younger than he'd initially thought, perhaps 25, with delicate features and long lashes that cast shadows on her cheeks in the lamplight. He wondered about her story, what had led to her being dragged behind a wagon, who the man was, and why he'd treated her with such cruelty. Jackson had seen the worst of humanity during the war, but there was something particularly disturbing about violence directed at women. His thoughts were interrupted when Abigail stirred, her brow furrowing as she struggled toward consciousness. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion evident as she tried to focus on her surroundings. When her gaze landed on Jackson, panic flashed across her face. She tried to sit up, a small cry escaping her lips as pain shot through her body. "Easy," Jackson said, keeping his distance to avoid frightening her further. "You're safe. You're at a doctor's house in Silver Creek." "Who?" Her voice cracked and she swallowed hard. "Who are you?" "Jackson Wyatt. I found you on the trail, being dragged behind a wagon." Recognition dawned in her eyes. "You pulled me up, on your horse," he nodded. "Can you tell me your name?" She hesitated, as if weighing whether to trust him. "Abigail," she finally said. "Abigail Vallens. Do you remember what happened, Miss Vallens?" Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. "My brother, Edward, he wanted me to sign over my half of our father's mining claim. When I refused—" Her voice trailed off, the memory too painful to articulate. Anger flared in Jackson's chest. "Your own brother did this to you." Abigail nodded, looking away. "Our father died 6 months ago. His will split the claim between us. Edward always resented that I got anything at all." A bitter smile touched her lips. "He said no sister of his would take what rightfully belonged to him." "The sheriff should hear this," Jackson said. "Your brother committed a crime. He should be held accountable." Fear flashed across Abigail's face. "No, Edward has friends in these parts. Even if he was arrested, it wouldn't last, and when he got out—" She shuddered. Jackson wanted to argue but saw the genuine terror in her eyes. He'd seen it before, the look of someone who knew the law wouldn't protect them. "All right," he conceded, "but you can't go back to him." "I have nowhere else to go," she said quietly. "No family, no friends close enough to help." Jackson ran a hand through his hair, thinking, "Dr. Miller and his wife have offered to let you stay until you're recovered. After that, we'll figure something out." Abigail studied him, wariness evident in her gaze. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Wyatt? You don't know me." It was a fair question, one Jackson had asked himself. "I couldn't ride past someone in need," he said simply. "And now that I know what happened, I can't in good conscience leave you without making sure you're truly safe." Something in her expression softened slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. Not many would have stopped. Martha Miller appeared in the doorway, a tray with soup and bread in her hands. "Ah, you're awake. You must be hungry, dear." As Martha fussed over Abigail, helping her sit up and placing the tray across her lap, Jackson excused himself to give them privacy. He stepped out onto the porch, breathing in the cool night air, his mind racing with possibilities and problems. If Edward Vallens came looking for his sister, Jackson needed to be ready. And if Abigail was right about her brother having influence in the area, they might need to consider leaving Silver Creek altogether. But where would she go? And why did he feel so responsible for her future? The door opened behind him, and Dr. Miller joined him on the porch. "She told us about her brother," he said without preamble. Jackson nodded. "She's afraid to involve the sheriff." "With good reason. Edward Vallens has the ear of Judge Collins in Copper Springs. The law might not offer much protection." Dr. Miller sighed. "Martha and I can keep her hidden for a while, but eventually word will get out that she's here." "I was thinking the same thing," Jackson admitted. "Do you have somewhere safe you could take her, once she's well enough to travel?" The question caught Jackson off guard. "I don't exactly have a permanent home, Doc. I've been working with horses around these parts, moving where the work takes me." Dr. Miller considered this. "My cousin owns a ranch about 4 days' ride north of here, near the Colorado border, peaceful place far from mining country. They might be able to offer sanctuary, at least temporarily." Jackson turned the idea over in his mind. It would mean delaying his plans to head to California, but something told him Abigail Vallens was worth the detour. "I'll think about it," he said. "But first, she needs to heal enough for the journey." 2 weeks, minimum," Dr. Miller replied. "Those wounds need time, and she's weak from the ordeal." 2 weeks. Jackson wondered if they had that much time before Edward Vallens tracked his sister to Silver Creek. Over the next few days, Abigail grew stronger. The color returned to her cheeks, and though her injuries still pained her, she was able to move around the Millers' home with increasing ease. Jackson visited daily, bringing flowers once and books another time, anything to break the monotony of recovery. He found himself looking forward to their conversations. Abigail was well-read and thoughtful, with opinions on everything from politics to poetry. Despite her gentle appearance, there was a backbone of steel in her that had clearly helped her survive her brother's brutality. On the fourth day, as they sat in the miller's small garden, Abigail asked about his past. "You know my story," she said. "But I know almost nothing about you, except that you're good with horses and apparently make a habit of rescuing damsels in distress." Jackson smiled. "Not a habit, I assure you, you're the first." "Then I'm honored," she replied with a small laugh, but still curious. Jackson rarely shared his history, but something about Abigail's direct gaze made him want to be honest with her. "I fought for the Union in the war," he began. "Came west afterward like many men did, found I had a way with horses and made that my living. I've moved around a lot, never staying in one place too long. No family," she asked softly. "Lost my parents before the war, had a brother who died at Gettysburg." Jackson looked away, the memory still painful after all these years. "After that, I didn't see much point in putting down roots." Abigail reached out, touching his hand lightly. "I'm sorry about your brother." The simple gesture of comfort caught him off guard, sending an unexpected warmth through him. "It was a long time ago. Grief doesn't always fade with time," she said. "Sometimes it just changes shape." Jackson looked at her, struck by the wisdom in her words. "You sound like you speak from experience." "My mother died when I was 16. Influenza. My father never really recovered from losing her, though he tried to hide it for my sake." Abigail's expression grew distant. "Edward was different then, we all were. People change," Jackson said. "Yes," she agreed. "Sometimes for the worse." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant sounds of the town going about its business. "Doctor Miller mentioned his cousin's ranch," Jackson said eventually. "He thinks it might be a safe place for you, at least until we figure out a more permanent solution." Abigail's eyes widened. "We?" Jackson hadn't meant to imply he would stay with her, yet he realized he couldn't imagine simply dropping her off and continuing on his way. "I won't abandon you to strangers," he said. "Not after what you've been through." Gratitude softened her features. "You've already done more than most would, Mr. Wyatt." "Jackson," he corrected. "After all we've been through, I think we're past formalities." She smiled, and for a moment, Jackson forgot about the danger that might be searching for them. "Jackson, then, and you must call me Abigail." Their peaceful moment was shattered by the sound of hooves pounding down the main street. Jackson was on his feet instantly, peering through the garden gate toward the commotion. 3 riders had stopped in front of the sheriff's office, dust billowing around their horses. One dismounted a tall man with a shock of red hair that matched Abigail's auburn locks. "Edward," Abigail whispered, her face draining of color. "How did he find me so quickly?" Jackson helped her to her feet. "We need to get you inside, now." They slipped back into the house, where Martha Miller was already watching through the front window with concern. "Is that him?" she asked as they entered. Abigail nodded, her hands trembling. "He'll search every building in town if he has to." "The cellar," Martha decided. "There's a hidden space behind the wine racks where we used to store valuables during Indian raids. He won't find you there." As Martha hurried Abigail toward the cellar door, Jackson made a decision. "I'm going to listen to what he tells the sheriff. We need to know what we're up against." "Be careful," Abigail said, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his heart beat faster. "Edward is dangerous when he's angry." Jackson nodded, slipping out the back door and making his way toward the sheriff's office through the alleyways. He positioned himself beneath an open window, straining to hear the conversation inside. "My sister is unwell," Edward's voice carried clearly. "She's been having delusions since our father died, ran off during one of her episodes. I've been searching everywhere for her." "That's mighty concerning," Sheriff Benson replied, "but I haven't seen any new women in town matching her description." "A witness saw a man bringing an injured woman to the doctors here 4 days ago," Edward pressed. "Red hair, green eyes, that's Abigail." There was a pause before the sheriff responded. "Dr. Miller did treat a woman recently, but she was passing through with her husband. They left 2 days ago, heading west." Jackson almost smiled. The sheriff might not be able to arrest Edward without proof, but he was clearly not helping him either. "I'd like to confirm that with the doctor," Edward said, his tone darkening. "Of course." His office is at the end of the street, though I believe he's making house calls this afternoon. Another voice joined the conversation, one of Edward's companions. We should check the boarding house and saloon too. Someone must have seen her. Good idea, Edward agreed. If she's still here, we'll find her. Jackson had heard enough. He hurried back to the Miller house, entering through the back door to find Dr. Miller waiting anxiously. They're searching for her, Jackson reported. Edward's telling people she's mentally unwell, that she ran off during an episode. Dr. Miller scowled. Despicable but clever. Makes it harder for her to find allies. The sheriff told them you treated a woman, but that she left town 2 days ago with her husband. It won't fool them for long. No, it won't, Dr. Miller agreed, and I expect they'll be here soon to question us directly. Jackson paced the small kitchen. We need to leave tonight. She's not fully healed. She'll be dead if her brother finds her, Jackson cut in. Is she strong enough to ride? Dr. Miller hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. If you're careful and make frequent stops, yes. But my cousin's ranch is 4 days away under good conditions. We'll manage, Jackson said, already formulating a plan. We'll need supplies, horses. I have a wagon, Dr. Miller offered. Not as fast as horseback, but she could lie down if needed, and it would allow you to carry more supplies. Jackson considered this. A wagon would be slower but more comfortable for Abigail. It might work. We could leave after dark, take the northern trail. I'll prepare what you'll need, Dr. Miller said. You should tell Abigail. Jackson nodded, heading for the cellar. He found Abigail and Martha in the hidden space behind the wine racks, a small room with a cot and a few supplies. He's here, Abigail said as soon as she saw him, not a question but a statement of fact. Yes, he's telling people you're mentally unwell, that you ran away during an episode. Anger flashed in her eyes. Of course he is. He can't very well admit he tried to kill me for my inheritance. We need to leave tonight, Jackson told her. Dr. Miller has a wagon we can use. We'll head for his cousin's ranch. Abigail nodded, a determination replacing her fear. I'm ready. I won't let Edward control my life any longer. Martha squeezed her hand. That's the spirit, dear. Now let's get you prepared for the journey. As the women gathered what Abigail would need, Jackson returned upstairs to help Dr. Miller ready the wagon. They worked quickly, loading supplies and planning their route. You'll need to avoid the main roads, Dr. Miller advised. Take the old Trapper's Trail north out of town. It's rougher terrain but less traveled. I know it, Jackson confirmed. We'll stick to back trails as much as possible. They were interrupted by a knock at the front door. Dr. Miller motioned for Jackson to hide in the back room while he answered it. From his position, Jackson could hear the conversation clearly. Dr. Miller. Edward's voice was pleasant, but held an undercurrent of menace. I'm looking for my sister, Abigail. Sheriff Benson mentioned you treated a woman recently. Yes, a traveler who took ill on the road. Her husband was quite concerned. They continued their journey west once she was well enough. This woman, what did she look like? Dr. Miller didn't hesitate. Blonde, blue-eyed, pretty young thing. Not my sister, then, Edward said, disappointment evident in his tone. May I come in, just to be certain? I'm afraid I have a patient with a highly contagious fever, Dr. Miller replied smoothly. For your own safety, I must insist you remain outside. There was a tense pause before Edward spoke again. Very well. But if you see a red-haired woman, approximately 26 years old, please inform Sheriff Benson immediately. She's unwell and needs to return home where she can be properly cared for. Of course, Dr. Miller agreed. I hope you find her soon. The door closed and Jackson released the breath he'd been holding. Dr. Miller returned, his expression grim. He didn't believe me, he said quietly. He'll be watching the house. Then we'll need a distraction, Jackson decided. Something to draw attention away from your home while we slip out the back with the wagon. Dr. Miller thought for a moment. I have an idea. The livery stable at the edge of town has been having trouble with its horses escaping lately. The gate latch is faulty. If someone were to accidentally leave it open tonight, Jackson smiled. That would certainly create a commotion. I'll speak to the stable boy. He owes me a favor after I treated his mother last winter. As night fell, Jackson sat with Abigail in the cellar, explaining their plan. She listened intently, asking questions about the route and what to expect. It won't be an easy journey, he warned. The terrain is rough and we'll need to travel mostly at night at first to avoid being spotted. I'm stronger than I look, she assured him. And certainly stronger than Edward believes. Jackson had no doubt about that. In the short time he'd known her, Abigail had shown remarkable resilience. There's something else we should consider, he said carefully. If we're stopped and questioned, it would be better if we appeared to be traveling together legitimately. Abigail raised an eyebrow. You mean as husband and wife? It would raise fewer questions, he explained. A man and woman traveling alone otherwise might attract unwanted attention. She nodded, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. That makes sense. I can pretend to be Mrs. Wyatt if needed. The way she said his name sent an unexpected flutter through Jackson's chest. He pushed the feeling aside, focusing on the practical matters at hand. We'll leave around midnight, he told her. Try to rest until then. Abigail reached out, catching his hand as he stood to leave. Thank you, Jackson, not just for saving me that day, but for everything since. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. You don't need to, he said, his voice rougher than he intended. Just stay alive and free. That's payment enough. Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary before Jackson pulled away, suddenly aware of how close they were in the small space. I'll come for you when it's time, he said, heading for the stairs, the hours until midnight passed slowly. Jackson checked and rechecked their supplies, ensuring everything was ready for a quick departure. Dr. Miller provided medicines for Abigail's ongoing recovery, along with detailed instructions for their care. At 11:30, the distraction began. Shouts erupted from the direction of the livery stable as horses galloped through the streets of Silver Creek. Lanterns flared to life as townspeople emerged from their homes to help catch the escaped animals. Now, Dr. Miller said, guiding them to the wagon hidden behind his house. Edward and his men will be occupied with the commotion. Jackson helped Abigail into the wagon, where Martha had created a comfortable bed of blankets. Dr. Miller pressed a letter into Jackson's hand. For my cousin, he explained. He'll help you when you reach the ranch. Thank you for everything, Jackson said, shaking the doctor's hand. Godspeed, Martha whispered, embracing Abigail one last time. Be safe, dear. Jackson took the reins, guiding the wagon slowly through the back alley and toward the northern edge of town. They passed only one person, a young boy chasing after a stray horse who paid them no attention. Once they reached the trapper's trail, Jackson allowed himself to breathe easier. They weren't safe yet, not by a long shot, but they'd made it out of Silver Creek without detection. How are you holding up? He asked, glancing back at Abigail. She was sitting up, watching the town recede into the distance. Better than expected, she replied. It feels good to be taking action instead of hiding. Jackson understood that feeling well. We'll travel through the night and find a place to rest during the hottest part of tomorrow. Then continue on after dusk. Do you think Edward will figure out where we've gone? Eventually, Jackson admitted, but by then we'll have a substantial head start. They traveled in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the creaking of the wagon and the steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves on the hard-packed trail. Abigail moved to sit beside him on the driver's bench, wincing slightly as she settled. You should be resting, Jackson chided gently. I've been resting for days, she countered. Besides, the view is better from here. The night sky stretched above them, a canopy of stars untouched by the lights of civilization. The waning moon provided just enough illumination for Jackson to navigate the trail. It's beautiful, Abigail murmured. I used to sneak out at night sometimes just to look at the stars. Edward caught me once and told our father I was meeting a boy. She laughed softly. I was 12 at the time. Was he always cruel to you? Jackson asked. Abigail considered the question. Not always. There was a time when we were close before our mother died. After that, something changed in him. Father favored me, I reminded him of mother, and I think Edward resented that. That's no excuse for what he did. No, she agreed. It isn't, but sometimes I wonder who Edward might have become if our lives had taken a different path. Jackson glanced at her profile, struck by her capacity for compassion even toward someone who had nearly killed her. "You have a generous heart, Abigail Vallens," she smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Not generous, just tired of carrying hatred. It weighs too much." They continued through the night, stopping occasionally to rest the horses and allow Abigail to stretch her legs. By dawn, they had covered considerable ground, the landscape changing from the open desert around Silver Creek to more rugged, wooded terrain. Jackson found a secluded spot near a small stream to make camp. As Abigail rested in the shade of a large oak tree, he tended to the horses and prepared a simple meal from their supplies. "We made good time," he said, handing her a plate of beans and hardtack. Abigail accepted it gratefully. "Where exactly are we heading? You mentioned Dr. Miller's cousin's ranch, but I don't even know the name." "Aspen Valley Ranch," Jackson told her, "near a town called Pinehaven. It's smaller than Silver Creek, more isolated. Dr. Miller says his cousin keeps to himself mostly, raises horses and some cattle. Should be a safe place to lie low for a while." "And after that?" she asked quietly. It was a question Jackson had been avoiding. What happened after they reached the ranch? Would they go their separate ways? The thought bothered him more than it should. "That depends on you," he said carefully. "What do you want to do once you're truly free of your brother?" Abigail looked down at her plate, considering. "I never really allowed myself to think about it. Even before this happened, my life was controlled by my father, then Edward. The idea of choosing my own path is almost overwhelming." "You could go anywhere," Jackson pointed out. "Start fresh where no one knows you." "Perhaps," she mused, "though I have no skills to speak of other than reading and keeping house. You're smart and resilient. You'd find your way." She smiled at his confidence in her. "What about you? Where will you go after this adventure is over?" Jackson had been headed to California before fate intervened. He'd heard there was good money in breaking horses for the large ranches there, but now the idea held less appeal than it once had. "I haven't decided," he admitted. "I tend to follow opportunity where it leads." Their conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of hooves. Jackson was immediately alert, motioning for Abigail to be silent as he drew his revolver and moved toward the edge of their small camp. The rider wasn't on the trail but moving through the woods some distance away. Jackson caught glimpses of the horse, a paint stallion through the trees. "Is it Edward?" Abigail whispered, fear evident in her voice. Jackson shook his head. "Different horse, might be a trapper or hunter." He kept his gun ready nonetheless. "Stay here. I'm going to make sure they pass by without noticing us." He moved quietly through the underbrush, positioning himself where he could observe the rider without being seen. As the figure came into clearer view, Jackson relaxed slightly. It was an older man, gray-bearded and weathered, leading a pack mule laden with furs, just a trapper, as he'd guessed. The man continued on his way, oblivious to their presence. Jackson returned to camp where Abigail waited anxiously. "Just a trapper," he assured her, "but we should move on soon. This trail sees more traffic than I'd like." They broke camp efficiently, leaving no trace of their presence. Jackson helped Abigail back into the wagon, noticing how she tried to hide her winces of pain. "Your injuries are bothering you," he observed. "I'm fine," she insisted. "Just a little stiff from the riding." Jackson retrieved a small bottle from their medical supplies. "Dr. Miller gave me this for your pain. He said to take it sparingly, but it should help." Abigail accepted the medicine with a grateful nod. "Thank you. I didn't want to complain." "It's not complaining to acknowledge pain," Jackson said gently. "You've endured more than most could bear. There's no shame in seeking relief." A shadow passed over her face. "Edward always said I was weak when I showed pain or fear, that I took after our mother that way." "Your brother is wrong about many things," Jackson said firmly, "including that." They continued their journey through the day, keeping to less traveled paths and watching carefully for signs of pursuit. By nightfall, they had crossed into more mountainous terrain, the air growing cooler as they gained elevation. "We should reach Pinehaven in another 2 days if we maintain this pace," Jackson said as they made camp that evening. 3 at most." Abigail nodded, helping to unpack their supplies despite Jackson's protests that she should rest. I feel useless just sitting while you do all the work. You're healing, he reminded her. That's work enough. She smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face and made Jackson's heart skip a beat. You're a kind man, Jackson Wyatt. Don't spread that around, he joked. I have a reputation to maintain. Their laughter filled the small clearing, a moment of lightness in the tension of their flight. As they settled by the fire, Jackson found himself watching Abigail more than was strictly necessary, noticing the way the firelight played across her features and brought out the gold flecks in her green eyes. He'd rescued women before from drunken cowboys, overzealous suitors, even a few bandits, but he'd never felt this pull toward any of them. Abigail was different somehow. Perhaps it was her quiet strength or the way she faced her fears head-on. Or maybe it was simply that fate had thrown them together in the most desperate of circumstances, forging a bond that transcended normal acquaintance. Whatever the reason, Jackson was becoming increasingly aware that when they reached Aspen Valley Ranch, he wouldn't be ready to say goodbye. The next morning dawned clear and cool, promising good traveling weather. They made steady progress, stopping around midday to rest and eat by a small pond. Abigail seemed stronger, moving with less obvious pain, though Jackson still insisted she take breaks from sitting on the hard wagon bench. Tell me about your life before the war, Abigail said as they shared a simple meal of dried beef and biscuits. You mentioned your parents died young. Jackson nodded, surprised to find himself willing to share stories he rarely spoke of. My father was a blacksmith in Ohio. Mother helped run the shop. They both took sick one winter pneumonia. I was 17, my brother Thomas 15. That must have been difficult. We managed. I took over the smithy and Thomas helped when he wasn't in school. We were doing all right until the war broke out. Jackson's expression darkened with memory. We both enlisted, different regiments. I was at Antietam when Thomas was killed at Gettysburg. Abigail reached out, her hand covering his. I'm sorry. The simple touch was comforting in a way Jackson hadn't experienced in years. After the war, I couldn't go back to Ohio. Too many memories. Sold the smithy and headed west. And became a horse trainer, Abigail finished for him. Among other things, he added with a slight smile. Tried my hand at mining for a while, did some scouting for the cavalry. Even dealt faro in a saloon for a season, but horses I understand. Is that what you'll do in California, train horses? Jackson nodded. That's the plan. The big ranches there pay well for someone who can break horses without breaking their spirit. You'd be good at that, Abigail said softly. You have a gentle touch despite your strength. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Jackson thought about closing the distance between them, about discovering if her lips were as soft as they looked. The impulse startled him enough that he pulled back, clearing his throat. We should get moving, he said, standing abruptly. Still a lot of ground to cover. If Abigail noticed his sudden change in demeanor, she didn't comment on it. They packed up camp in companionable silence and continued their journey. The terrain grew increasingly challenging as they ventured deeper into the mountains. The trapper's trail narrowed in places, forcing Jackson to navigate carefully to keep the wagon wheels from slipping over the edge of steep drops. Is there an easier route? Abigail asked as they inched along a particularly treacherous section. The main road would be smoother, but it's also where Edward would look first if he's following us, Jackson explained. This way is safer, even if it's slower. They made it through the difficult pass by late afternoon, emerging onto a plateau that offered a breathtaking view of the valley below. Jackson stopped the wagon, allowing them both to appreciate the vista. It's magnificent, Abigail breathed, taking in the sweeping expanse of pine forests and meadows. I've never seen anything like it. Few have, Jackson agreed. This route isn't well known except to trappers and a handful of prospectors. As they stood side by side, the beauty of the landscape before them, Jackson felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. Something about Abigail's presence made the moment feel significant, as if they stood on the threshold of something new and promising. The spell was broken by a distant rumble of thunder. Dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, moving swiftly in their direction. We need to find shelter, Jackson said, eyeing the approaching storm. Mountain weather can turn dangerous quickly. They hurried back to the wagon and continued down the trail, searching for suitable protection from the elements. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and ozone. There, Jackson pointed to a rocky outcropping with what appeared to be a shallow cave beneath it. That should provide cover until the storm passes. They reached the shelter just as the first heavy drops began to fall. Jackson quickly unhitched the horses and led them under the overhang, while Abigail gathered their essential supplies from the wagon. The cave was larger than it had appeared from a distance, extending back into the mountainside. Previous travelers had used it before the remains of old campfires, and a crude stone hearth indicated it was a known stopping point. "We're fortunate," Jackson said, arranging their bedrolls near the back of the cave where it was driest. "This will be more comfortable than trying to sleep in the wagon during a downpour." Abigail set about gathering what dry wood she could find near the entrance while Jackson tended to the horses. By the time the storm hit in earnest, they had a small fire going and the makings of a decent camp. Rain lashed at the entrance, the occasional flash of lightning illuminating the interior of their refuge. Thunder boomed overhead, echoing through the mountain passes. "Do you think the storm will delay us much?" Abigail asked, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders as the temperature dropped. "Depends on how long it lasts," Jackson replied, adding another stick to their fire. "The trails will be muddy afterward, which will slow us down, but we're still making good time overall." Abigail nodded, her expression thoughtful as she stared into the flames. "I've been thinking about what happens when we reach the ranch." Jackson tried to keep his voice neutral. "Oh, I can't stay there forever," she said slowly. "Dr. Miller's cousin is being kind to offer sanctuary, but I need to build my own life eventually. What are you considering?" She met his gaze steadily. "I still own half of my father's mining claim. If I could sell my share, I'd have enough to start fresh somewhere, maybe open a small shop or boarding house." "Your brother won't make selling easy," Jackson pointed out. He seemed determined to control that claim. "True, but there are ways around him. I could hire a lawyer to represent me, sell to a mining company big enough that Edward couldn't intimidate them." Determination sparked in her eyes. "I won't let him steal what's rightfully mine." Jackson admired her resolve. "It's a good plan." "You deserve your inheritance." "What about you?" she asked. "Will you continue to California after I'm settled?" There was something in her tone, a hint of regret, perhaps, that made Jackson hesitate. The truth was, he'd been reconsidering his plans since they began this journey. The idea of saying goodbye to Abigail grew more difficult with each passing day. "I'm not sure anymore," he admitted. "California has been my goal for a while, but plans can change." Their eyes met across the fire, and the air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. Abigail was the first to look away, a blush coloring her cheeks. "Well, we still have time to figure things out," she said lightly. "We're not at the ranch yet." The storm continued through the night, forcing them to stay in the cave until morning. They took turns keeping watch, though Jackson found it difficult to sleep even during his rest periods. His mind was too full of thoughts about Abigail and their uncertain future. By dawn, the rain had stopped, though the sky remained overcast. They emerged from their shelter to find the world washed clean, the air crisp and filled with the scent of wet pine. "It's beautiful," Abigail said, stretching carefully. Her injuries were healing well, but certain movements still caused her discomfort. "How are you feeling today?" Jackson asked, noting the way she winced slightly. "Better," she assured him. "Just stiff from sleeping on the ground." They ate a quick breakfast before breaking camp. The trail was muddy, as Jackson had predicted, making progress slower than previous days. The wagon wheels sank into the soft earth in places, requiring both of them to push while the horses strained against their harnesses. "This would be easier on horseback," Jackson commented as they freed the wagon from a particularly stubborn rut. "Next time I flee from my murderous brother, I'll plan accordingly," Abigail replied with a wry smile that made Jackson laugh despite their predicament. By midday, the trail conditions improved as the sun broke through the clouds, drying the ground. They stopped to rest near a fast-flowing stream, allowing the horses to drink while they refilled their water skins. "We should reach Pine Haven by tomorrow afternoon," Jackson said, studying the crude map Dr. Miller had provided. "Aspen Valley Ranch is about an hour's ride beyond the town." Abigail nodded, her expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Will you stay at the ranch for a while, or will you continue on immediately?" The question carried weight beyond its simple words. Jackson took his time answering, wanting to be honest with her and himself. "I thought I might stay a few days," he said carefully. "Make sure you're settled safely before deciding my next move." "I'd like that," she replied softly. Their moment was interrupted by the sound of a gunshot in the distance. Both froze, exchanging alarmed glances. "Hunters, maybe?" Abigail suggested, though her voice betrayed her uncertainty. Jackson shook his head, already moving toward the wagon. "That was a revolver, not a rifle. Hunters use rifles." They quickly gathered their belongings and prepared to move on. Jackson helped Abigail into the wagon, his movements efficient but gentle. "Stay low," he instructed, "and keep my spare pistol close." He hadn't told her about the gun before, wanting to spare her additional worry, but now he retrieved it from his saddlebag and handed it to her. Abigail took it without hesitation, her hands steady despite the fear in her eyes. "I hope you won't need it," he said, "but just in case." They continued along the trail, moving as quickly as the terrain allowed. Jackson kept a vigilant watch on their surroundings, alert for any sign of pursuit or danger. The shot they'd heard could have been anything: a traveler defending against wildlife, a disagreement between prospectors, even just someone clearing a jammed weapon. But Jackson's instincts told him to be cautious, and he'd learned long ago to trust those instincts. They traveled for another hour without incident, the trail gradually widening as it approached a more frequently used path. Jackson began to relax slightly, thinking perhaps they'd overreacted to the gunshot. Then they rounded a bend, and Jackson reined the horses to an abrupt halt. Ahead, blocking the trail, were 3 mounted men. Even at a distance, he recognized the shock of red hair on the one in the center. Edward Vallens had found them. "It's him," Abigail whispered, her face pale. "How did he find us so quickly?" Jackson's mind raced, calculating their options. They couldn't outrun 3 men on horseback while pulling a wagon. Fighting was risky with Abigail's safety at stake. The only advantage they had was that Edward and his companions hadn't spotted them, yet the bend in the trail provided momentary concealment. "We need to leave the trail," Jackson decided, already turning the wagon. "There's a ravine back there that might provide cover." They backtracked quickly, finding a narrow gap between trees where Jackson guided the wagon off the main path. The going was rough, branches scraping against the wooden sides as they pushed deeper into the forest. "They'll see our tracks," Abigail pointed out, clinging to the seat as the wagon bounced over uneven ground. "Can't be helped," Jackson replied grimly. "We just need to put enough distance between us that we can set up an advantage." They continued through the woods until they reached the ravine Jackson had spotted earlier. It wasn't deep, but the sides were steep enough that the wagon couldn't descend safely. "We'll have to continue on foot," Jackson said, quickly unhitching the horses. "Take only what you can carry." "Essential supplies, water, weapons." Abigail nodded, gathering their most important possessions while Jackson prepared the horses. He saddled one, leaving the other as a pack animal. "Can you ride?" he asked her. "Yes," she replied. "Father insisted both Edward and I learn." "Good. You'll take the saddle horse, I'll lead the other and walk alongside." He helped her mount, noting her wince of pain but also her determination. "The ravine leads north, which is the direction we want anyway. If we follow it for a few miles, we should be able to circle back to the trail beyond where they're waiting." They set off down the ravine, moving as quickly as caution allowed. Jackson kept glancing back, expecting to see Edward and his men appear at any moment. The ravine provided some cover, but their tracks would be clear to anyone with basic tracking skills. "Why is he so persistent?" Jackson wondered aloud as they picked their way over rocky ground. "Half a mining claim, even a profitable one, hardly seems worth this level of effort." It's not just about the claim anymore, Abigail said quietly. It's about control. Edward can't stand that I defied him, that I escaped, and now that I've run away with a stranger. She trailed off, implications hanging in the air between them. Jackson understood. In Edward's mind, his sister's association with Jackson would be a stain on the family honor, one more reason to hunt them down. They continued in silence for a time, the only sounds their footsteps and the occasional snort from the horses. The ravine began to widen, its sides becoming less steep as they progressed. "Listen," Abigail said suddenly, pulling her horse to a stop. Jackson paused, straining his ears. At first he heard nothing beyond the natural sounds of the forest. Then it came the distant thunder of hooves moving fast. "They've found our trail," he said, urgency sharpening his voice. "We need to move faster." The ravine opened into a small clearing where a stream cut across their path. Jackson made a quick decision. "We'll follow the stream," he told Abigail. "Water will hide our tracks better than anything else." They urged the horses into the shallow water, following its course as it wound through the trees. The cold water splashed around their ankles, but neither complained about the discomfort. The stream eventually led them to a larger creek that flowed north, exactly the direction they needed to go. They continued along it for nearly a mile before Jackson directed them back onto dry land. "We should have bought ourselves some time," he said, helping Abigail dismount so both horses could rest. "They'll have to search for where we left the water." Abigail nodded, leaning against a tree as fatigue caught up with her. Despite her brave front, Jackson could see the ordeal was taking its toll on her still healing body. "We'll rest here for a short while," he decided. "Eat something, gather our strength." They shared jerky and hardtack in silence, both listening intently for sounds of pursuit. The forest remained quiet except for birdsong and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. "Do you think we lost them?" Abigail asked hopefully. "Temporarily," Jackson replied, not wanting to give false reassurance. "But Edward strikes me as a man who doesn't give up easily." "No," she agreed. "He doesn't." After their brief rest, they continued north, eventually finding a game trail that seemed to head in the right direction. Jackson estimated they were paralleling the main trail, perhaps a mile or two east of it. "If we keep this pace, we should reach Pine Haven by tomorrow morning," he told Abigail. "From there, it's not far to the ranch." She nodded, determination evident in the set of her jaw despite her obvious exhaustion. "I can make it." They traveled until dusk made further progress dangerous. Finding a small clearing sheltered by dense pines, they made camp, keeping the fire small to avoid detection. As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply. Abigail shivered despite the fire and the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Jackson hesitated only briefly before moving to sit beside her, offering his warmth. "Thank you," she murmured as he draped an arm around her. "For everything?" "Don't thank me yet," he said. "We're not safe until we reach the ranch." "Even so," she insisted. "You've risked your life for a stranger. That deserves gratitude, regardless of the outcome." Jackson looked down at her, struck again by her resilience and grace under pressure. "You're not exactly a stranger anymore, Abigail." Their eyes met in the firelight, and for a moment, the danger receded, leaving only the two of them and the connection that had grown between them. Without conscious thought, Jackson found himself leaning closer, drawn to her like a moth to flame. Abigail tilted her face up, her lips parting slightly in invitation. When their mouths met, the kiss was gentle at first, tentative, a question being asked and answered. Then it deepened, becoming something more urgent, more honest than any words they could have spoken. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing faster, eyes wide with surprise and something else, recognition, perhaps, of what had been building between them since that first moment on the dusty trail. "I shouldn't have done that," Jackson said, though his tone lacked conviction. "Why not?" Abigail challenged softly. "You're vulnerable right now, running for your life, dependent on my help. It wouldn't be right to take advantage of that." She shook her head, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Jackson Wyatt, do you really think me so easily influenced? I kissed you because I wanted to, not out of gratitude or fear or dependence." Her directness startled a laugh from him. You're unlike any woman I've ever known, Abigail Vallens. I'll take that as a compliment, she replied, settling more comfortably against his side. Now, perhaps we should discuss what happens after we reach the ranch. What do you want to happen? He asked, genuinely curious about her thoughts. She was quiet for a moment, considering. I want freedom to choose my own path. I want to use my inheritance to build something for myself. And she hesitated, then continued with quiet certainty. I want to see where this might lead between us. The honesty of her answer stirred something deep in Jackson's chest. For years, he'd avoided attachments, convinced that solitude was safer, simpler. But now, holding Abigail in the firelight, the idea of continuing alone seemed hollow. I want that too, he admitted. Though I'm not sure what I have to offer you. I'm not a wealthy man, Abigail, just a drifter with a knack for horses. I don't need wealth, she said simply. I need someone who sees me as I am and values what he sees, someone who treats me as an equal, not a possession. Her hand found his in the darkness. I think you might be that someone. Jackson squeezed her fingers gently, marveling at how quickly certainty could replace doubt when the right person came along. Then I suppose we'll have to find out. They stayed close through the night, taking turns keeping watch. When dawn broke, they continued their journey with renewed purpose, no longer simply fleeing Edward, but moving toward a shared future neither had anticipated. The terrain gradually became less rugged as they approached Pinehaven. By mid-morning, they could see smoke from chimneys in the distance, their first glimpse of civilization since leaving Silver Creek. We should avoid the town itself, Jackson decided. Edward might have sent word ahead or be waiting there himself. Abigail agreed, and they circled wide around Pinehaven, using Dr. Miller's map to locate the road that led to Aspen Valley Ranch. The journey took longer than expected, the horses tiring after their arduous trek through the wilderness. It was late afternoon when they finally crested a hill and saw the ranch spread out before them, a large main house, several outbuildings, corrals filled with horses, and pastures where cattle grazed. A sign over the main gate proclaimed Aspen Valley Ranch in bold letters. We made it, Abigail breathed, relief evident in her voice. Jackson nodded, though he remained vigilant. They weren't truly safe until they were inside those gates with the owner's protection secured. They approached cautiously, aware they must present a bedraggled sight after days on the trail. A ranch hand spotted them and called out to someone in the barn. Moments later, a tall man with silver-streaked hair emerged, watching their approach with evident curiosity. When they reached the gate, Jackson dismounted and helped Abigail down from her horse. He kept a hand at the small of her back, both supporting her and maintaining protective proximity. "Can I help you folks?" the man asked, his tone cautious but not unfriendly. "We're looking for Mr. Daniel Miller," Jackson replied. "We have a letter from his cousin, Dr. Thomas Miller of Silver Creek." The man's expression changed to one of recognition. "I'm Daniel Miller. Thomas is my cousin indeed. What's this about?" Jackson produced the letter, which Daniel read quickly, his brow furrowing as he absorbed its contents. When he finished, he looked up, studying them both more carefully. "Well now," he said finally, "seems Thomas has sent me some trouble." Despite his words, his eyes were kind as they rested on Abigail's weary face. "But family's family and friends of family are welcome here. Come on in, both of you. You look like you could use a hot meal and a safe place to rest." As they followed Daniel toward the main house, Jackson felt Abigail's hand slip into his. He glanced down at her, finding a smile on her face despite her exhaustion. "We made it," she whispered again. Jackson squeezed her hand gently. "Yes, we did." Daniel's wife, Sarah, was a warm, motherly woman who immediately took Abigail under her wing, ushering her upstairs to bathe and change into clean clothes borrowed from their daughter, who was away visiting relatives. While Abigail was being cared for, Daniel offered Jackson a drink in his study where they could speak privately. "Thomas's letter was brief but concerning," Daniel said, pouring whiskey into 2 glasses. "Said the young lady was in danger from her own kin, that you rescued her under dramatic circumstances." Jackson accepted the drink with a nod of thanks. Her brother tried to kill her over an inheritance, tied her behind his wagon and dragged her. When I intervened, he didn't take kindly to losing his prisoner. Daniel's expression darkened. Barbaric, and you believe he's still pursuing you? We saw him and 2 companions on the trail yesterday, managed to evade them, but I doubt he's given up. Jackson took a sip of whiskey, appreciating the burn. How secure is your ranch? Secure enough, Daniel assured him. 20 ranch hands, all loyal and well armed. We've had our share of trouble with rustlers over the years, know how to handle unwelcome visitors. He studied Jackson thoughtfully. Thomas mentioned you're good with horses. I am, Jackson confirmed. It's how I make my living. Could use someone with those skills here, Daniel remarked casually, if you were looking to stay a while. The offer caught Jackson by surprise. That's generous, Daniel shrugged. Not generosity so much as practicality. Good horsemen are hard to find, and it seems to me you might have reason to want to stay close to Miss Vallens. Heat crept up Jackson's neck at the older man's perceptiveness. We've discussed possibilities. Daniel smiled knowingly. Well, the offer stands. Think about it. He raised his glass. In the meantime, welcome to Aspen Valley. Later that evening, after a hearty meal and introductions to the house staff, Jackson and Abigail found themselves alone on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Abigail looked transformed in clean clothes, her hair washed and braided, her face scrubbed free of trail dust. The borrowed dress was a simple blue calico that brought out the green of her eyes. Mrs. Miller says I can stay as long as needed, she told him. She's even offered to help me find a lawyer in Denver who could handle selling my share of the mine without requiring my presence in Copper Springs. That's good news, Jackson said, genuinely pleased for her. Mr. Miller made me an offer to a job working with his horses. Abigail's eyes brightened. Are you considering it? I am, he admitted. It would mean postponing California, but he hesitated, then decided on honesty. But I find I'm not ready to say goodbye to you, Abigail. She moved closer, her hand finding his on the porch railing. I'm glad. Because I'm not ready for that either. The moment was perfect, the setting sun, the safety of their sanctuary, the promise of possibilities stretching before them. Jackson turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. I know this has happened quickly, he began. And maybe it's too soon to speak of such things, but I want you to know that my feelings for you are real. They're not born of the danger we've shared or some misplaced sense of responsibility. I know, she said simply. I feel the same clarity. Then perhaps when you're settled and your business with the mine is concluded, we might discuss a more permanent arrangement. Abigail's smile was radiant. I'd like that very much, Jackson Wyatt. He leaned down to kiss her, a gentle promise sealed with the last golden rays of sunlight. Their peaceful moment was shattered by the sound of a horse approaching at speed. Jackson tensed immediately, moving Abigail behind him as he peered into the gathering dusk. One of the ranch hands rode up to the house, his expression urgent. Mr. Miller, riders approaching the north gate. 3 men, armed, Daniel emerged from the house, rifle in hand. Get inside, he ordered Jackson and Abigail. This might be nothing, but I won't take chances. Jackson guided Abigail into the house but positioned himself at a window where he could observe the approaching confrontation. Daniel and several ranch hands had formed a defensive line at the main gate, weapons ready but not yet raised. Through the gathering darkness, Jackson could make out 3 mounted figures approaching slowly. The lead rider's red hair gleamed in the last light of day. It's Edward, Abigail whispered, her voice tight with fear. Jackson's hand moved to his revolver. Stay here, I'm going out there. Before she could protest, he slipped out the door and moved quickly to join Daniel at the gate. The older man gave him a sidelong glance but didn't comment on his presence. Edward Vallens reined his horse to a stop several yards from the gate, his companions flanking him. All 3 men had their hands near their weapons, though none had drawn yet. Evening, gentlemen, Edward called, his voice falsely pleasant. I'm looking for my sister, Abigail. I have reason to believe she's on your property. Don't know any Abigail, Daniel replied evenly. This is private land. I'm going to have to ask you to move along. Edward's smile didn't reach his eyes. Now, there's no need for unpleasantness. My sister is unwell, confused. She ran away from home in a state of delusion, accompanied by this man. He nodded toward Jackson. I'm simply concerned for her welfare. That's not how I remember it, Jackson said coldly. Dragging a woman behind a wagon doesn't look like concern to me. Edward's facade slipped, revealing the rage beneath. This doesn't concern you, stranger. Abigail is my blood, my responsibility. She's not property, Jackson countered. And she's made her choice clear by running from you. Edward's hand moved toward his gun, but Daniel's voice cut through the tension. I don't know what's happening between you folks, he said firmly, but I do know this is my land, and I decide who stays and who goes. Right now, I'm deciding you go, mister. Edward surveyed the line of armed ranch hands and clearly calculated the odds. They weren't in his favor. This isn't over, he said, his gaze fixed on Jackson. Abigail belongs with her family. I'll be back with the law. You do that, Daniel replied calmly. Sheriff Henderson is a good friend of mine. I'm sure he'd be interested to hear about a man dragging his sister behind a wagon. Something dangerous flashed in Edward's eyes, but he controlled it, jerking his horse around. Let's go, he ordered his companions. They watched until the three riders disappeared into the darkness. Only then did the ranch hands lower their weapons, though sentries were posted at both gates as a precaution. He'll be back, Jackson said grimly as they walked toward the house. Probably, Daniel agreed, but not tonight, I wager, and by then we'll be better prepared. Abigail met them at the door, her face pale but composed. What did he say? Jackson relayed the conversation, watching her carefully for signs of distress. Instead of fear, however, he saw determination hardening in her eyes. I won't let him control me anymore, she said firmly. Not through fear or force or false claims about my mental state. No, you won't, Jackson agreed, admiration clear in his voice, and you won't face him alone. That night, despite Edward's threat hanging over them, Jackson slept more soundly than he had in days. The knowledge that Abigail was safe in a room down the hall, protected by the solid walls of the Miller home and vigilant ranch hands, allowed him to finally relax his guard. Morning brought clear skies and a sense of purpose. Over breakfast, they discussed next steps with Daniel and Sarah. I have a friend in Denver who's both a lawyer and a banker, Daniel told them. Name's Joseph Bennett. If anyone can help you navigate selling your share of the mine without returning to Copper Springs, it's him. How soon could we contact him? Abigail asked. I can send a telegram today, Daniel offered. Town's only an hour's ride from here. I'd like to accompany you, Jackson said. There are supplies we need, and I want to speak with the sheriff myself about Edward. Plans were made quickly. Daniel would ride into Pine Haven with Jackson while Sarah remained at the ranch with Abigail, protected by the ranch hands. They would return by evening, hopefully with news from Denver and the local sheriff. Before leaving, Jackson sought out Abigail, finding her in the garden behind the house. She was sitting on a bench beneath an apple tree, the morning sunlight filtering through the leaves to dapple her upturned face. You look peaceful, he observed, joining her. She smiled. I feel it despite everything. For the first time in years, I'm making my own choices. We'll be back before dark, he promised. Will you be all right here with Mrs. Miller? I'll be fine, she assured him. Sarah has promised to teach me how to make her famous apple pie, and I've been wanting to write down everything that's happened while it's still fresh in my memory. Jackson raised an eyebrow. Planning to publish your adventures? Perhaps, she laughed. Or simply preserve them for our, she stopped abruptly, a blush coloring her cheeks. Our what? He prompted gently. Abigail met his gaze, vulnerability and hope mingling in her eyes. Our future together. If that's what you want. Jackson reached for her hand, bringing it to his lips. It is what I want, Abigail, more than I can properly express. Her smile was like sunrise. Then be careful today and come back to me safely. Always, he promised, sealing the vow with a kiss. The ride to Pine Haven with Daniel was uneventful, the older man sharing stories of the ranch and his 30 years of marriage to Sarah. Jackson found himself envying the simple contentment in Daniel's voice when he spoke of his wife and wondering if he might find similar happiness with Abigail. Pine Haven proved to be a modest but thriving town with a main street featuring all the necessities: general store, bank, telegraph office, doctor, sheriff, and the obligatory saloon. Daniel headed to the telegraph office while Jackson sought out Sheriff Henderson. The lawman was a grizzled veteran of the frontier, with a penetrating gaze that seemed to measure Jackson's worth in an instant. He listened to Jackson's account of Edward's actions without interruption, only asking clarifying questions when the tale was complete. "I know Edward Vallens by reputation," Sheriff Henderson said finally. "He's got money and influence in Copper Springs, but neither extends to my jurisdiction. If he returns and causes trouble, I'll handle it." His eyes narrowed. "But I suggest you and Miss Vallens make legal arrangements quickly. A brother has certain rights under the law unless the lady is married or otherwise legally independent." The implication was clear. Without legal protection, either through marriage or formal legal action regarding her inheritance, Abigail remained vulnerable to Edward's claims. "Understood," Jackson said. "We're contacting a lawyer in Denver today." The sheriff nodded. "Good. In the meantime, I'll send a deputy to ride patrol near Aspen Valley for the next few days, precautionary measure." Jackson thanked him and headed to the general store to purchase supplies. As he was concluding his business, Daniel entered, a telegram in hand. "Good news," the older man announced. "Joseph Bennett will be arriving in Pine Haven in 2 days. He's bringing documents that should help Abigail secure her inheritance without returning to Copper Springs." Relief washed through Jackson. That is good news. They finished their errands and began the ride back to the ranch, both men eager to share the positive developments with Abigail. They were about halfway home when Daniel suddenly reined his horse to a stop, head cocked as he listened intently. "Gunshots," he said grimly. "Coming from the direction of the ranch." Cold fear gripped Jackson's heart. Without a word, both men spurred their horses to a gallop, racing toward Aspen Valley. As they crested the final hill overlooking the ranch, they saw smoke rising from one of the outbuildings. Ranch hands were running toward the barn, where flames were beginning to lick at the roof. A diversion, Jackson realized aloud. "Where's Abigail?" They thundered through the gates, calling out to the nearest ranch hand. "What happened?" Daniel demanded. "3 riders came from the east," the man reported quickly. "Set fire to the barn, then headed for the house. Mrs. Miller and the young lady barricaded themselves inside. Some of the boys are with them, but it's chaos with the fire and the horses panicking." Jackson didn't wait to hear more, leaping from his horse and racing toward the main house, gun drawn. He could see signs of a struggle, broken flower pots on the porch, a shattered window, bullet holes in the front door. "Abigail," he shouted as he approached. The door opened a crack, a rifle barrel appearing first, followed by Sarah Miller's face. "Jackson, thank God." She pulled the door wider. "Hurry inside." The house's interior was a scene of tense preparation. Furniture had been pushed against windows, and 2 ranch hands stood guard with shotguns. Abigail was at the dining room table, loading a revolver with steady hands. "Jackson," she cried when she saw him, dropping the gun and rushing into his arms. They came so suddenly. The fire was just a distraction. "Edward wanted—" "Are you hurt?" he interrupted, checking her for injuries. "No, I'm fine. We all are." The men tried to force their way in, but Sarah had a shotgun, and the ranch hands came running when they heard the shots. Abigail's voice was steady despite the circumstances. They retreated when they couldn't get in easily, but Edward shouted that he'd be back. Daniel had followed Jackson inside and was now conferring with his men about the barn fire. "It's under control," one reported. "Damage to the roof and some hay, but the horses are safe." "Where's Edward now?" Jackson asked. "Headed west toward the hills," a ranch hand answered. "Jake and Pete are tracking them, but at a distance, just to make sure they've really gone." Jackson turned to Abigail, decision crystallizing in his mind. "We need to move forward with our plans immediately. The lawyer will be here in 2 days, but I'm not sure we should wait even that long." "What are you suggesting?" she asked. Jackson took a deep breath. "Sheriff Henderson mentioned that a brother has certain legal rights over an unmarried sister, but a husband's rights supersede those." Understanding dawned in Abigail's eyes. "Jackson, are you proposing?" "Yes." He took her hands in his, aware that this wasn't the romantic scene he might have planned. I know it's sudden and perhaps motivated partly by practical concerns, but my feelings for you are real, Abigail. I believe we could build a good life together if you're willing. Abigail's expression softened, a smile breaking through the tension of the day. Yes, she said simply. I'll marry you, Jackson Wyatt, for practical reasons and impractical ones. Sarah Miller, who had been listening with undisguised interest, clapped her hands. Well, that settles it. We'll hold the wedding here tomorrow. Daniel knows the preacher in Pinehaven he can ride in first thing in the morning. Just like that, plans were set in motion. The chaos of Edward's attack transformed into preparations for a wedding. Sarah and her housekeeper began discussing food and decorations, while Daniel dispatched a ranch hand to Pinehaven with a message for the preacher. Amidst the activity, Jackson pulled Abigail aside to a quiet corner of the parlor. Are you sure about this? He asked softly. I don't want you to feel pressured by circumstances. She reached up to touch his face, her fingers gentle against his stubbled cheek. I've spent my whole life being controlled by others, my father, then Edward. This is the first decision that feels entirely my own. Her eyes held his, clear and certain. I choose you, Jackson, not out of fear or necessity, but because in the short time I've known you, you've shown me more respect and understanding than any man ever has. The sincerity in her voice dispelled his doubts. Jackson leaned down, capturing her lips in a kiss that spoke of promises and possibilities. The next morning dawned bright and clear, as if nature itself approved of their plans. The ranch was a flurry of activity as preparations for the wedding continued. Sarah had found a dress for Abigail, a simple but elegant gown of ivory satin that had belonged to her daughter. With minor alterations, it fit Abigail perfectly. Jackson, for his part, borrowed clean clothes from Daniel and even submitted to a proper shave, wanting to look his best for the occasion. As he stood by the window in the room that had been his for these few days, he reflected on the strange path that had led him here. A week ago, he had been a solitary drifter with no plans beyond reaching California eventually. Now he was about to become a husband, with responsibilities and connections he hadn't sought but somehow welcomed nonetheless. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Daniel entered, carrying a small wooden box. Something for you, he said, placing the box on the dresser. Wedding gift of sorts. Jackson opened it to find a pair of silver cufflinks, simple but finely crafted. These are too fine. Nonsense, Daniel cut him off. They were my father's. I have no sons to pass them to, and it seems fitting they go to a man starting a new life. He clapped Jackson on the shoulder. Sarah and I have taken a liking to you both. We'd be pleased if you considered staying on here, making Aspen Valley your home. The offer was generous beyond measure. Thank you, Jackson said, genuinely moved. We'll certainly consider it. Downstairs, the preacher had arrived from Pinehaven, along with Sheriff Henderson and a few townspeople who had been invited to witness the ceremony. The parlor had been transformed with wildflowers and ribbons, a makeshift altar set up before the fireplace. When Abigail appeared at the top of the stairs, Jackson forgot to breathe. Her hair was arranged in soft curls around her face, adorned with small white flowers. The ivory dress complemented her fair skin and brought out the rich auburn of her hair. But it was her smile, radiant and sure, that truly captured him. Sarah escorted her down the stairs in lieu of a father, and Jackson stepped forward to take her hand when they reached the bottom. Together, they walked to where the preacher waited. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They exchanged traditional vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish one another for all their days. When Jackson slipped a ring onto Abigail's finger, a simple gold band Daniel had procured from town that morning, the reality of the moment struck him fully. This remarkable woman was now his wife. And he, who had been alone for so long, was now part of something larger than himself. I now pronounce you man and wife, the preacher declared. You may kiss your bride. Jackson leaned down, capturing Abigail's lips in a kiss that sealed their union before God and witnesses. The small gathering erupted in applause and cheers. The celebration that followed was joyous, with food and drink flowing freely. Sarah had outdone herself, preparing a feast despite the short notice. There was even a small cake, decorated with fresh berries and cream. As the afternoon progressed, Sheriff Henderson approached the newlyweds, a document in hand. "Marriage certificate," he explained, handing it to Jackson. "All legal and binding. I've already filed a copy at the courthouse in Pine Haven." He looked significantly at Abigail. "As a married woman, you now have legal rights your brother cannot override. When the lawyer arrives tomorrow, you'll be able to proceed with selling your share of the mine without Edward's interference." "Thank you, Sheriff," Abigail said warmly, "for everything." The lawman tipped his hat. "Just doing my job, madam, and I must say it's a pleasure to help a couple who clearly belong together." As evening approached, the guests began to depart, offering final congratulations to the bride and groom. Daniel and Sarah had prepared the small guest cottage at the edge of the property for the newlyweds, giving them privacy while keeping them within the safety of the ranch. When they finally found themselves alone in the cottage, a momentary shyness fell between them. For all they had been through together, this was new territory, the intimacy of husband and wife. "It's been quite a week," Abigail said softly, removing the flowers from her hair. Jackson smiled, moving to help her. "From dragging you from the back of a wagon to making you my wife in 7 days. Not how I expected things to unfold. Do you regret it?" she asked, a hint of vulnerability in her question. "Not for a moment," he assured her, turning her to face him. "The circumstances may have been unusual, but my feelings for you are genuine, Abigail Wyatt." Her new name brought a smile to her lips. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," he murmured, drawing her closer. Their kiss deepened, the tentative exploration of earlier giving way to something more urgent, more honest. Jackson's hands moved to the buttons at the back of her dress, pausing there. "Are you sure?" he asked, wanting her to feel in control. In answer, Abigail guided his fingers to continue their work. "I'm sure," she whispered against his lips. "I want to be your wife in every way." The night that followed was a discovery of each other, tender and passionate by turns. In Abigail's arms, Jackson found a connection he hadn't known. He was missing a sense of belonging, of home, that transcended physical pleasure. As they lay together afterward, Abigail's head resting on his chest, Jackson stroked her hair, marveling at the turns his life had taken. "What are you thinking?" she asked, tilting her face up to his. "That I'm the luckiest man alive," he replied honestly. "And that I can't wait to build a life with you wherever that may lead us." "I was thinking about that," Abigail said, tracing patterns on his skin, "about where we might go from here. And I think I'd like to stay," she said thoughtfully, "at least for a while. Daniel and Sarah have been so kind, and you seem to enjoy working with the horses here." Jackson nodded. "I was considering the same. It's a good place to start our life together, safe with people who care about us. And far from Edward," Abigail added, a shadow crossing her face. "He won't bother us again," Jackson promised. "Once the lawyer handles the sale of your share of the mine, Edward will have no reason to pursue you." "I hope you're right," she said, though doubt lingered in her voice. Jackson kissed her forehead. "Even if he tries, he'll find we're not easy targets. Together, we're stronger than he is." Abigail smiled, the worry fading from her expression. "Together," she agreed. 2 days later, Joseph Bennett arrived from Denver. The lawyer was a sharp-minded man in his 50s who quickly grasped the situation and set about creating legal documents that would protect Abigail's interests. "Your marriage provides significant protection," he explained as they sat in Daniel's study. "As your husband, Mr. Wyatt now has legal standing to act on your behalf in business matters if you so designate him." "I do," Abigail confirmed. "I trust Jackson completely." Bennett nodded, making notes. "I can arrange for the sale of your share of the Vallens mine to Consolidated Mining Company. They've been looking to expand their operations in that area and will pay fair market value. The transaction can be completed without your presence in Copper Springs." "How long will it take?" Jackson asked. "A week, perhaps 2 for all papers to be signed and funds transferred." Bennett looked up from his notes. "I'll handle all communications directly. Your brother need never know your location." Relief washed over Abigail's face. "That would be ideal." "There is one more matter," Bennett said, his expression turning serious. "Given your brother's actions, I would recommend filing criminal charges. What he did dragging you behind a wagon is attempted murder, Mrs. Wyatt." Abigail tensed beside Jackson. "I've considered it, but pursuing charges would mean confronting Edward directly, testifying against him." "It would," Bennett agreed. "Those statements could be taken here and submitted to the court in Copper Springs." Jackson covered Abigail's hand with his own. "It's your decision," he told her. "Whatever you choose, I'll support you." She was quiet for a long moment, weighing her options. "Not now," she finally said. "Perhaps in the future, when enough time has passed that Edward no longer poses an immediate threat. For now, I want to focus on building our new life." Bennett nodded, accepting her decision without judgment. "Very well. I'll proceed with the sale of the mine share and ensure all legal protections are in place for your future security." Over the next 2 weeks, life at Aspen Valley Ranch settled into a pleasant routine. Jackson worked with Daniel's horses, his natural skill quickly earning him the respect of the other ranch hands. Abigail found her place as well, helping Sarah with household management and learning the intricacies of running a large ranch. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch of their cottage, watching the sunset and sharing their thoughts about the future. Sometimes they joined Daniel and Sarah for dinner in the main house, the older couple treating them like family from the start. Word came from Joseph Bennett that the sale of Abigail's share of the mine had been completed successfully. The funds were substantial enough to secure their future regardless of what path they chose. "We could buy land of our own," Jackson suggested one evening as they discussed possibilities. "Start a small horse ranch, perhaps." "We could," Abigail agreed. "Though I admit I've grown fond of Aspen Valley, it feels like home already." Jackson understood the feeling. After years of drifting, he too had found an unexpected sense of belonging here. "Daniel mentioned again yesterday that he'd welcome us staying on permanently," he told her. "He's not getting any younger, and Sarah worries about him managing everything alone." Abigail's eyes brightened. "Would you consider it?" Becoming partners with Daniel eventually, taking over the ranch operations. The idea held more appeal than Jackson had expected. "I would if it's what you want as well." "It is," she said firmly. "I like it here. I like the work, the people, the land itself. And I think we could build something wonderful together." Jackson pulled her close, marveling at how naturally they had fallen into partnership, not just in marriage but in all aspects of life. "Then we'll stay for as long as it feels right." Summer turned to autumn, bringing cooler temperatures and spectacular colors to the aspen groves that gave the ranch its name. Jackson and Abigail settled more deeply into ranch life, their cottage becoming truly their home as they added personal touches and created their own traditions. Word came occasionally from Sheriff Henderson in Pine Haven. Edward had returned to Copper Springs after his failed attempt to reclaim Abigail. According to the sheriff's sources, he was facing financial difficulties now that his sister's share of the mine had been sold to Consolidated Mining, who were implementing changes that diminished Edward's control and profits. "Sounds like he's reaping what he sowed," Daniel commented when they discussed the news over dinner one evening. "I can't find it in my heart to pity him," Abigail admitted, "but I do hope he finds peace eventually." Her capacity for forgiveness never ceased to amaze Jackson. It was one of the many qualities that had made him fall more deeply in love with her as the months passed. When the first snow of winter dusted the mountains, Abigail shared news that brought joy to their household. She was expecting a child, due in late spring. "A baby," Jackson breathed when she told him, wonder and trepidation mingling in his voice. "Are you certain?" "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday when I visited town," she said, her face glowing with happiness. "We're going to be parents, Jackson." He gathered her in his arms, overwhelmed by the miracle of it. He, who had been so long without family, would now be a father, and Abigail, whose own family had caused her such pain, would create a new one built on love and respect. "Are you happy about it?" she asked, searching his face. "More than I can express," he assured her, his voice rough with emotion. I never thought I'd have this: a wife, a child, a home. You've given me more than I ever dreamed possible, Abigail." The months that followed were filled with preparations and anticipation. Their cottage was expanded with Daniel's help and the labor of the ranch hands, adding a nursery for the coming child. Sarah knitted blankets and tiny garments, while Jackson crafted a cradle from aspen wood, sanding it to a silken finish. Spring arrived with its promise of renewal, the ranch coming alive with new growth and activity. Abigail's time drew near, and Jackson found himself both eager and anxious for the baby's arrival. On a perfect May morning, with wildflowers blooming across the meadows, their daughter was born. They named her Elizabeth Sarah Wyatt, honoring both Abigail's mother and the woman who had become like a mother to her in this new life. As Jackson held his daughter for the first time, looking down at her tiny face with its dusting of auburn hair, he felt a sense of completeness he had never known before. "She's perfect," he whispered, sitting beside Abigail on their bed, "just like her mother." Abigail smiled tiredly, reaching out to touch the baby's cheek. "She has your eyes, I think, and definitely your stubbornness. She certainly took her time arriving." Jackson laughed softly, marveling at how his wife could joke after hours of labor. "I think she'll have the best of both of us." As Elizabeth grew from infant to toddler, it became clear she had indeed inherited traits from both parents: Abigail's quick mind and compassionate heart, Jackson's determination and love of the outdoors. She thrived in the ranch environment, becoming a favorite of everyone from Daniel and Sarah to the youngest ranch hand. On Elizabeth's second birthday, as they celebrated with a small party at the main house, Daniel made an announcement that changed the course of their future once more. "Sarah and I have been discussing our retirement," he said, raising his glass in a toast. "We're not getting any younger, and we'd like to spend more time visiting our children and grandchildren back east. So we've decided to offer Jackson and Abigail full partnership in Aspen Valley Ranch, with an eye toward them taking over completely within the next few years." The offer was generous beyond measure, a testament to the bond that had formed between the two couples over the past 2.5 years. "We would be honored," Jackson replied, looking to Abigail for confirmation. Her nod and smile told him they were of one mind, as they so often were these days. "To the future of Aspen Valley Ranch," Daniel toasted, "and to the family that will carry it forward." As glasses clinked and congratulations were offered, Jackson pulled Abigail close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Did you ever imagine, when I pulled you from that wagon, that we'd end up here?" he asked quietly. She shook her head, wonder in her eyes. "Never. But I'm grateful every day for whatever twist of fate put you on that trail at exactly the right moment." "So am I," Jackson agreed, watching as Elizabeth toddled across the room to hug Sarah's legs. "So am I." In the years that followed, their family grew with the addition of a son, Thomas Jackson Wyatt, born 3 years after Elizabeth. The ranch prospered under their stewardship, gaining a reputation for fine horses and fair dealing that brought buyers from as far away as California and Texas. Daniel and Sarah eventually moved to a smaller house on the property, still involved in ranch life, but leaving the day-to-day operations to Jackson and Abigail. Their partnership, in business as in marriage, only strengthened with time and shared purpose. Word reached them occasionally about Edward. He had lost the mine entirely through gambling debts and poor management, and was last known to be working as a clerk in a Denver bank, a humbling position for a man who had once owned one of the most promising claims in Arizona territory. Abigail never sought contact with her brother, though she admitted to Jackson that she had forgiven him in her heart, if only to free herself from the burden of hatred. "Our children will never know that kind of family," she vowed one night as they sat on their porch, watching the stars emerge. "They'll grow up understanding that love isn't about control or possession, but about supporting each other's dreams and finding joy in shared accomplishments." Jackson took her hand, marveling as he often did at the wisdom of the woman he'd married. "They're lucky children," he said. "And I'm a lucky man." Abigail leaned her head against his shoulder, the simple gesture conveying the depth of connection between them. We built something good here, didn't we? Something that will last." "We did," Jackson agreed, his heart full as he gazed out over the ranch that had become their legacy. "Something very good indeed." From that fateful moment on a dusty trail, when a cowboy had ridden fast to pull a desperate woman into his arms, they had forged a love story neither could have anticipated, one built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and the daily choice to face life's challenges together. As twilight deepened into night over Aspen Valley Ranch, Jackson Wyatt held his wife close, grateful beyond words for the journey that had brought them home.